The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
This is the sound of Donald Trump supporters who gathered to greet him yesterday as he returned from his second federal level arraignment, his second federal indictment. He has a third indictment that is on the state level, and he is potentially facing a fourth total indictment, his second on the state level in Georgia, Fulton County, Georgia. That was a sound of raucous supporters chanting USA in support of their beloved former president, Donald J. Trump, who subsequently has gone up in polling since his indictment. He is outperforming all of his competitors in the Republican primary, especially Ron DeSantis. I think there's some 30 points between them in terms of polling. But this is where we are. The party is celebrating a twice impeached, 3 times indicted former president. Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, and gender non-conforming individuals to another episode of the Benjamin Dixon Show. Today is Friday, August 4th, 2023. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll have much more on this third indictment and the subsequent gaslighting that is coming from conservatives. The gaslighting of America is astonishing. More later in today's episode. But first, I want to begin with yet another plot by conservatives. Another method. I almost called it a new method, but it's an old method that is now catching steam because of the Supreme Court decision in the month of June that, essentially banned affirmative action. It was headed up by the lawsuit that was taken to the Supreme Court was headed up by a white activist by the name of Edward Bloom. I specify his race because he recruited Asian Americans who felt like they were discriminated against because of affirmative action. He could not get a successful case with any white students. And so he, a white man who had a grudge match against affirmative action, recruited Asian American students to take this case all the way to the Supreme Court. And they did. Well, he's not done. He successfully got rid of affirmative action. Ed Bloom, who has been his sole goal for the last 20 some odd years, he successfully did away with affirmative action, but he is not done. In fact, he and the likes of Stephen Miller, they are just beginning. According to Reuters, a group founded by the conservative activists instrumental in the U.S. Supreme Court's June decision rejecting affirmative action in collegiate admissions, on Wednesday sued an Atlanta-based venture capital fund that supports Black women who own small businesses, accusing it of unlawful racial discrimination. That's the twist. That's the new method. Again, according to Reuters, the nonprofit American Alliance for Equal Rights, founded by affirmative action foe Edward Bloom, said in its lawsuit that the firm, called Fearless Fund, is violating Section 1981 of the Civil Rights Act of 1866, a U.S. law barring racial bias in private contracts, by making only Black women eligible in a grant competition. It was filed in federal court in Atlanta. Now, this is just the beginning of the type of lawsuits that we will be seeing as a result of the Supreme Court decision, giving the likes of Edward Bloom and Stephen Miller the legal push that they need to go around the country and sue any organization, any university, any institution that is attempting to undo all of the racial biases that led to the current economic condition and structure that we have now. Let's be sure. They are trying to make sure that any corporation, institution, or university that is trying to correct the wrong of hundreds of years of white supremacy and racism and racial discrimination, anybody who's trying to correct that is now going to be targeted and sued by the likes of Ed Bloom and Stephen Miller. Here is an advertisement, a literal commercial advertisement that sounds a lot like a mesothelioma commercial by Stephen Miller, seeking particularly white people who want to sue other institutions for discrimination. Listen in.
Hello, I'm Stephen Miller, founder and president of America First Legal, a charitable foundation dedicated to defending your rights in court. I am here today with an urgent message. America's biggest corporations and universities are illegally discriminating against Americans based on race and sex. These corporations and universities have adopted so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion policies that punish Americans for being white, Asian, or male. If you or a loved one were denied a job, raise, promotion, or professional opportunity as a result of diversity quotas, equity mandates, affirmative action, or other racial preferences, we want to hear from you. Please call us at 1-877-AFL-5454 or go to aflegal.org/hotline. As a nonprofit, all services provided by America First Legal's attorneys are free to our clients. So if you are a victim of bigotry disguised as diversity or equity, please contact us now at 1-877-AFL-5454. That's 1-877-AFL-5454 or aflegal.org/hotline. Racism must be defeated. Thank you.
There you go. That's the new technique. That is, and again, it's not a new technique. It's something that I got a whiff of, I would say maybe 5 to 10 years ago, somewhere in that window, that the most effective tool for white supremacists to block progress is to co-opt the language of the civil rights and the methodology of the civil rights movement. And in doing so, they have attempted, and they're doing a good job of neutralizing the forward momentum that society had, particularly American society, in correcting the wrongs of 400 years of slavery, 100 years of Jim Crow, the prison industrial complex, the school to prison pipeline, all of the things that we know have structurally harmed Black people specifically in this country. Stephen Miller and Ed Blum and the conservative Make America Great Again crowd, they have found their new technique, which is to label any attempt to undo discrimination, the effects of discrimination, to label it as discrimination itself. That's the world, the upside down world that we live in. And they have been aided and abetted by a conservative activist Supreme Court, an unethical and illegitimate Supreme Court, by the way. They have aided and abetted this white supremacist technique, this methodology of co-opting the language of the civil rights movement, now labeling anyone who attempts to undo the ravages of discrimination, calling them discriminatory, calling anyone who's trying to undo the hundreds of years of racism in this country, calling them racist, calling any institution or university that tries to structurally correct the structural harm that was done to Black people, well, calling them bigoted. And of course, will they succeed in some of these? Well, they succeeded at the Supreme Court. They got rid of affirmative action. So can these cases be won? Yes. Yes. And will they be upheld? Well, if these cases land in front of conservative benches, it is a good possibility that they will also be able to enshrine with the precedent of the federal courts. They are attempting to enshrine a new era, a new epoch of American history where anyone who fights against the reality of racism in this country will be labeled a racist with the power of a lawsuit and with the power of precedent set by the Supreme Court or by any of the federal judiciary. So we should expect more of this to come. We should expect that anytime we see an institution, an organization, a university try to level the playing field, we will see more white grievance activists like Stephen Miller and Edward Blum suing institutions for being racist because they have diversity and inclusion programs. That's the twisted world in which we live. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome back to The Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at thebenjamindixonshow.com.
Welcome back. Welcome back. The truth of the matter is that we live in very dark and draconian times. When you look at the type of people who run this country, the type of people who are able to get affirmative action overturned, like Ed Bloom, the shenanigans of Stephen Miller, like the clip I just played in the last segment, right? The kind of commitment that these people have to white supremacy, but not only white supremacy, but the type of commitment that they have to power. Their commitment to obtaining and holding power is so absolute that there's no lie that they won't tell. There's no gaslighting that they will not engage in. They will overthrow democracy for the sake of them maintaining the levers of power. And this is evidenced by the coordinated gaslighting that we have been enduring, specifically around the indictment, this third indictment of President Trump, former President Donald Trump. Now, I'm going to play a clip for you of Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy as he extends and continues this outright lie and gaslighting of the United States of America, feigning outrage over an intentionally misleading interpretation of the indictment. And that's me being kind. It's an outright lie, trying to convince themselves and their supporters that Donald Trump is being indicted over lying, over the First Amendment, over free speech, when they know that's far from the truth. Here is Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy trying to make it seem as though Donald Trump merely did what Hillary Clinton and Al Gore did by claiming that they actually won the election. This is the gaslighting that's happening right now. Listen in.
And I can say the same thing that Hillary Clinton says about her election that she lost. I can say the same thing about the DNC who said it about the 2016 race. I can say the same thing about those in the Democratic Party from the leadership on down about George Bush not winning, that Al Gore did. But were any of them prosecuted? Were any of them put in jail? Were any of them held with no response to be able to get out? The answer is no. So yeah, you can raise that someone raised a question. And you know, in America, you are entitled to raise a question. You're entitled to question whether it was honest or not. That's the uniqueness of the First Amendment. That's the uniqueness of America. But you know what? You shouldn't be prosecuted for your thoughts. And the difference here is when Hillary Clinton said it, nothing happened to her. When they said it in Georgia's election, nothing happened to them either. You know what? When the DNC said it, nothing happened to them either. So stop using government to go after people who politically disagree with you. That is wrong, and that should stop now.
I would really hate if that was my voice and I was the Speaker of the House and everyone in the world had to hear my voice sound like a sniveling little weasel. I mean, that's the character and the tone, the quality of his voice. He sounds like a weasel. Never mind the fact that he's just gaslighting, outright lying to America. I mean, what do you do as a nation, as a civilization, when the people with the most power will actively engage in not just one lie, but a web of lies that is pushed in your face, even though you know that they know that you know that they are lying. Everybody involved in this equation knows that Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy is lying, knows that everyone who's going on Fox News forwarding this lie, that they're lying as well. Everyone knows that, but these people are so shameless. They do not care. They can't afford to care, because if they actually cared about their lies, it would be impossible for them to hold their positions, because what they stand for is so devoid of substance, or rather what they stand for is so outright harmful to people that they can't tell the truth about it. They have nothing that they want to do for America. They only have what they want to take from Americans. And in order to accomplish that goal, they must outright lie to your face. The Speaker of the House is lying to you. the rank and file of the Republican Party is lying to you. Hell, even the New York Times got in on it and said yesterday in the headline that this was a clash between the right to lie and free speech. No, that is not what is in the indictment. The indictment is over the fact that Donald Trump, he conspired to defraud the United States of America. He conspired to obstruct an official government proceeding. That is the certification of the Electoral College vote, the fake elector scam, right? There's even some of 16 fake electors. Michigan has charged 16 fake electors for Donald Trump with election law and forgery felonies. So Donald Trump inspired the fake electors scheme, and while people are being held accountable for it in Michigan for their part in it, Republicans are gaslighting the United States of America to make sure that Donald Trump, the man who inspired it, is not held accountable. Listen, I'm just going to be honest with you. The United States of America has every part of the recipe necessary to destroy itself, to literally relegate itself to the dustbin of history. Not from any external actor, not from any invasion, right? It's coming from within. The call always comes from inside the house. What we have happening in this country is untenable. The country is unmanageable because we have people who are ungovernable in positions in the government. Right. It's one thing to have a raucous crowd of just random people in the body politic, but the people who are committed the most to being ungovernable or making sure that this country cannot function, they are in power. They're the same people who make sure that every opportunity they have, they can shut down the government. We always have a government shutdown fiasco every single chance that they can do it. They make sure that we are there. They make sure that we cannot hold anyone who is a Republican accountable. They make sure that we don't have any desire in this country to live in coexistence. Their entire marketing and branding strategy is to see how many people they can absolutely drive into a fury. Anger, hatred, bigotry. That is their business model. How can this country survive when you have this level of sociopathy actually pulling the levers of power? Long story short is that perhaps we're living through the reality that this country can't survive it.
Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and get twice the content and unfiltered interviews without any of the commercial interruptions. Welcome back to The Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at thebenjamindixonshow.com.
Welcome back. There are about 20,000 high school students in the state of Florida who are now unable to take the AP psychology course. That is because of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who, according to Politico, his administration has essentially barred a high school advanced placement psychology course in the state because it includes lessons on sexual orientation and identity that violate state law. And this is according to the College Board. The decision not only deepens a raging dispute between the struggling Republican presidential candidate and massive educational nonprofits, but it also threatens the course loads of thousands of Florida students just before a new school year. Quote, "We are sad to have learned that today the Florida Department of Education has effectively banned AP psychology in the state by instructing Florida superintendents that teaching foundational content on sexual orientation and gender identity is illegal under state law," according to the College Board. They released that in a statement. The state has said districts are free to teach AP psychology only if it excludes any mentions of these essential topics. So, Governor Ron DeSantis' war on woke has now cost students their AP psychology course, or they can take the course, but the course has to remove any references to sexual identity. These are high school students. This is a college level course being offered to high school students. And now, because it makes any reference to sexual orientation, it has to be banned. We're not talking about preschoolers. We're not talking about elementary school kids, right? And there's a case to be made of teaching kids about their bodies, about their identities at an early age, number one, as a means of protecting them, right? One of the number one ways children can effectively report sexual assault is if they have the working knowledge of their body and their anatomy and the language and the verbiage necessary to describe what happened to them. But we're talking about an AP high school, college level course. And the state of Florida is like, oh, we don't want you. Ron DeSantis' Florida is like, oh, no, we can't possibly let high school students talk about sexual orientation. It's the absurdity of it all that is really staggering. It's mind numbing to realize that we're in a society that is this backwards, this so they're not even this Puritan, right? I was going to say Puritan as a way of describing that they're not really that. When the reality is that case after case after case of sexual assault, we see the perpetrators are white conservative Christian men. Case after case after case. Just take a look at, just for an anecdote version of this, go to hashtag not a drag queen on Twitter, and you will see more cases than you want to read, right? So trigger warning, they're all horrific, terrible cases, but every single one of them is a white Christian conservative man. So I refuse to use Puritan as a way to describe this era in which we're living. It's not as though these people want to make a more righteous and holy society. It's that they want to control the sexuality of every single human being under their control. They want to dictate to you what you can and cannot do. And guess what? They're going to do it based off of their sexual proclivities. It never fails that when you see a preacher who is preaching so dogmatically against sex and sexuality, they're preaching against premarital sex, they're preaching against homosexuality, you are going to find that they are living the absolute worst, most debased, most degenerate lifestyle imaginable. So I don't believe any of these people for 1 second when they say they are doing these things to protect the children, because they are the ones who are harming the children. Some of the loudest voices out at these protests, they have turned out to actually be sexual predators. So we're living in an epoch in American history where the ones who are committing the crimes have successfully been able to do two things. Number one, outlaw the teaching, any type of sexual education teaching that can help children have the language necessary to describe what Pastor John did to them or what Deacon Bob did to them, right? They have successfully made sure that they can't teach that in schools. It's a part of the Don't Say Gay, Don't Stop the Woke Act in the state of Florida. And then the second thing they've done, they have successfully scapegoated an entire community of people who, for one, I have yet to find a single instance of a drag queen that has sexually assaulted anyone. And I am regularly inundated after case after case after case of religious leaders, of police officers, overwhelmingly white Christian conservative men who have. But they have successfully scapegoated the LGBTQIA community. They have successfully scapegoated the drag queen community, and they have successfully neutralized teachers' ability to educate children with the language necessary to successfully describe, in some cases in court, to successfully describe what their abuser did to them. We are certainly living through the upside down. More evidence that we live in the upside down, this period where the actual culprits have successfully scapegoated the LGBTQIA community, and more evidence that we're living in a time where fascism is most certainly on the rise. We're surviving right now through the beginning stages of a neo-fascist state. I want to play a clip for you by Nick Fuentes, who is a rising star in the conservative movement. And I want you to listen very closely to how he discusses the age of consent. He's saying it out loud very boldly because his job in this game of political rhetoric and political commentary is to move the Overton window so that as people hear him say more and more ridiculous things, it's ridiculous to us, but it becomes normalized. And this particular message is one that is normalizing underage marriage, child brides, and the idea of consent, period. Just rejecting the idea of consent altogether. Listen in.
I think the age of consent should be lower. I don't even really believe in the concept. You want to know why? Because marriage is consent. Being married means you consent to sex all the time. There's no such thing as marital rape, because when you marry a person, you have a marital obligation to give your spouse sex whenever they want it. It's literally Catholic doctrine. So, you know, the only moral way to have sex is within marriage. The only way to get married is to consent to sex on demand, and both partners agree to that. That's their obligation. It's a mortal sin to deny it. So that's how's that for consent theory? That's my age of consent. It's not age of consent, it's age of marriage. Age of consent. What is this? What is this? Christians have no use for such things. Christians have no use for such a concept. You get married. A Christian doesn't have sex with anybody. A Christian has sex with their spouse within marriage. And nobody's getting married at a prepubescent age. People get married when they're at a reproductive age, when they're adolescents. And so, that, I'm just redefining it.
You know, what he said at face value is horrific enough, right? This idea that there's no such thing as marital rape, that as soon as you marry someone, you are, it is a mortal sin to not allow them to have sex with you on demand. Then add on top of that he wants to do this to girls. Girls at 10 years of age are old enough to reproduce, Nick. These are the people you should be afraid of. This type of thinking, this type of dogma, and the fact that it's tied to his religious interpretation, his religious dogma, makes it that much more dangerous, right? It makes it more dangerous because they get the freedom of spreading this type of clearly dangerous rhetoric that is dangerous to the well-being of women, of girls, of young girls. It's dangerous to their well-being, but they get to spread this danger with the fervor of religion, with the energy of a preacher, and then just pass it into the regular discourse. Well, the thing is that the regular discourse in this country is moving closer and closer towards Nick, what we just heard, right? There is an entire movement right now of people who are committed to ensuring that women have a certain role in society. And one of the key roles is to, one, be married without the ability to get a no-fault divorce. But they're going after no-fault divorce, right? So you won't be able to divorce these men, but while you're married to them, you are going to be forced to sleep with them on demand because they don't believe that you should have any consent in marriage. And then, oh, by the way, they want to start doing this to girls as young as they're old enough to reproduce.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.